Welcome back to those who are returning to my channel from OET Reading Part B or Part A. If you haven't seen those videos, I highly encourage you to go back in the playlist and watch those for some tips and tricks and strategies. Today we're focusing on Part C. So if you're new here, welcome. My name is Rachel and this is RS Language Solutions. We are focusing on one of the more challenging aspects of the OET, reading comprehension skills, with this section. Now, before we begin, stay tuned for the end of my video. For those that are preparing for the OET who need extra practice, I have some exciting updates and announcements of ways that you can continue practicing if you find my videos beneficial. So more to come. Let's jump right into strategies. So how do you improve your scores for Part C? If you've already seen my Part B videos, you're going to notice some similarities, but let's review some of those things. First off is verbs. Verbs in the actual question themselves can be quite confusing, and more so, the verb can actually make the answer correct or incorrect. So based on what they're actually asking, we want to be very careful with verbs like suggest, concludes, concerns, highlights, points out. Each of these has a slightly different, what we say, nuance to it. So what are they looking for in terms of the language when they ask you about, for example, what this reading suggests? Another thing to note, there are different types of questions. 6 of our 8 questions are going to be general reading comprehension. Now in Part C, a lot of the time we're looking at a little bit bigger picture than in Part B. So things like gist and main points. We're also looking at attitudes and opinions. The language of these can make these questions very challenging. And then 2 of our 8 questions are actually called lexical reference. So this is testing your ability to recognize connections between different parts of the text. So, for example, you might be given an expression or a vocabulary word where you may not know the word, but you have to use the context to conclude what it means. We also have cohesive devices. I'll talk about those in a minute, of this connection between ideas. Another challenge of Part C is you have a long text. These texts are broken down into paragraphs, and you want to keep careful track mentally of which paragraph you are on, because the question will ask you in the first paragraph, what are they suggesting, for example. You also want to check for bolded words. The bolded words usually are lexical reference questions that you will have to answer something about. All right, a little bit more there. So tips and tricks. Just like Part B, when you're looking for evidence, sometimes in your question there'll be clear evidence to support your answer. Other times it's more of a process of elimination. So of your 4 options, maybe 2 of them are quite obviously wrong. So you can eliminate that with that negative evidence. And then between your 2 that are left, you look for supporting details for one of them over the other. Next point is just what we said with verbs, right? Go back to the question. Check very carefully that your answer is actually fully answering every part of the question. A very common difficulty with these questions is one option will have partial answers to it, and the other option will have a complete answer, and it's the complete one that we're looking for. Now, with some of our questions, there is this skill of inferencing which is being tested. So inferencing is tricky because what it's not you using outside medical knowledge to make a conclusion. That's not what it is. But it is taking details, so let's say example 1, 2, and 3, and then having to think about what do all 3 of those examples have in common? Or what do those examples point to as a conclusion? So when we get to inferencing, we have to be careful. Just like what I said, we're not necessarily bringing in new information. We use what's in the text, but we actually think critically about what's written to reach our answer there. And then finally, back to lexical reference questions. So words like this, it, or they, these would be cohesive devices. There's different grammatical names for these as well. Basically, they connect either sentences or ideas. So oftentimes, the key to these kind of questions is you should be able to substitute an exact noun or an exact phrase for that word, and it should logically make sense as an answer. And if you can't do that, well, then that tells us there's something missing in your answer there. These ones, for some people, they find them quite easy. For others, they find them quite challenging. Finally, before we get into some practice, you'll notice in section C, we have a range of difficulty for our questions. Sometimes you can read the paragraph and there's a nice phrase or two that points to the answer and it's quite a clear piece of evidence. Other times it takes a lot more time to put together example 1, 2, and 3 and then finally make your conclusion. And that can make some of the questions seem more difficult. So I want to encourage you, when you're taking the exam, you don't want to spend all your time on the challenging questions. You want to go through all of them. You want to leave the ones blank that are really challenging, come back to them. But the big problem we see is if you spend too long on one question, it can affect your ability to complete the others. So keep that in mind, and you'll see as we practice, there is a total mix here of difficulties. So let's get started, and in this video we're going to tackle 3 of the questions. We'll do our next video as the other 3 for this same text that I'm about to show you. So take a look here, and what I've done to help us, I've taken the full text and I've divided it into shorter sections here. So this whole text is on physicians and drugs in sport, and just like with section B, you have a section of reading for each question. However, they're divided into paragraphs. So what I want you to do, I want you to pause the video, step 1, read the text, step 2, then answer the question to the best of your ability. And some people prefer to read the question before reading the text or vice versa, and you can decide which works best for you. Now, to guide you, I want to point out just a couple of things about this section for our first example here. So we have question 7. In the first paragraph, the writer suggests that physician involvement in sports doping, ... So that continues. And then we have 4 options. Whenever you have the word suggest, immediately your mind should be thinking, there's not probably going to be a direct statement that exactly tells me what they're thinking. Suggest is one of those verbs we have to conclude a little bit from what is written. So look at the options closely, and I encourage you, try to spot the differences. So in option A, has been conducted irresponsibly. So the focus there is on, okay, responsibly or irresponsibly. Keep that in mind as you read. B, has been well-intentioned but misguided. Notice here there's a contrast, one or the other. I always tell individuals, look out for contrast, because if you can find that sort of contrast in the text, that's a good clue that you're on the right track. C, has received more attention than it deserves. I'm always cautious of words like more, less, better, worse. Be aware of that. Is that actually what the text is saying? And finally, has succeeded in reducing the potential dangers. So you're looking for similar words with that. And again, has it succeeded? Not yet, partially, and so forth. So sometimes when you're actually previewing those questions, you want to try to guide your brain. What am I looking for in the text? What sort of things could point to the answer? So pause the video. When you're ready, unpause it, and I'm going to explain and walk us through here. Okay, assuming you've done that and you've chosen your answer, let's take a look. And for this one, I'm going to actually show us a process of elimination so that you see what this looks like. So let's start at the top here with option A, and we're going to try it and eliminate as much as possible. Has been conducted irresponsibly. So first thing I do when I'm reading this is I kind of skim for the word responsible or irresponsible if there's any sort of evidence in there as well. And we actually do see here, so it says it is the physician's responsibility to exert some control over this. We have mentioned here about the attention it's received and it being dangerous. But if I'm looking through here, there's the fact that physicians don't understand, but the actual whether it was responsible or irresponsible, I go back to that question, is there any evidence that that's being suggested? And I would say no, I'm not seeing anything in there in terms of suggesting that as a conclusion. Okay. Option B has been well-intentioned but misguided. So now I'm looking for, again, that sort of contrast or any idea that points to what is the original intention here. Again, we see in this first section, has received much less attention than it deserves. If I'm skimming that, I automatically can think, that's a piece of evidence to rule out option C, has received more attention than it deserves. So we actually have a clear statement right at the beginning to eliminate option C, which is great. So that leaves me down to option B and option D. So I have here physician involvement in these illicit and often medically dangerous practices will seem counterintuitive to those who associate physicians with the task of healing and the injunction to do no harm. Okay, so that's interesting. We have mention of dangerous, but again, whether the harm has been reduced or not stated there, just about it being counterintuitive. Now look at the next sentence. One rationalization for physician-managed doping, so rationalization, reason or motivation, think of synonyms there, is the lesser harm argument. Okay, and then it goes on to explain. Since an athlete may not possess the self-discipline or knowledge to limit their intake of doping drugs, it is the physician's responsibility to exert some control over this and thereby, I'm liking the language in here. This is getting my language radar going, and it should be getting yours too. To exert some control over this and thereby limit medical harm. So, and then we have what such physicians do not understand is that at least some of these athletes will top off their medical sanctioned doses with drugs they obtain illegally on the black market. So look in here. This is a beautiful example of what I mean. A contrast. So what are the physicians trying to do? So this lesser harm argument here that, because they don't have the self-discipline or knowledge, the physician has to actually regulate or control that. However, or basically what we have next, the physicians don't understand is that actually these athletes are doing other things, getting more drugs elsewhere. So look how nicely this is summed up. Whoop, sorry there. I'll just erase so we can see that. Look how nicely this is summed up in this idea. Sorry, wrong one here. Well-intentioned, that's what I'm going for. It has been well-intentioned. The lesser harm argument, the actual reason they're doing that seems good, but misguided. And what's the key there with misguided? They do not understand. So they're not informed or they're not actually aware of those things. So two things there. Contrasts, they can happen within a sentence using words like but, nonetheless, that's more of an obvious contrast. Also look out for contrasts that happen between ideas or sentences. And we have a clear example there. Sentence 1 is about the intention. Sentence 2 is about the lack of understanding or in being informed. And what's nice here is with D, there's really no mention about the success rate. Has it been helpful or not? Probably they'll get into that later in the letter or the text, but for now, we don't have any evidence that that's what's being suggested. So 2 points there, contrast, but also notice how the language of suggest makes us think. And I want you to remember that when you see that word suggest, you're going to have to do some kind of careful analysis in there of the language. Good. Let me know if there's any questions to that one in the comments below. Well done if you were able to get that with that rationalization. All right, onwards we go. So, notice here, same paragraph, and this sometimes happens, it's actually very nice for our how much we have to read, but this one is a lexical reference question. So specifically we see it bolded and underlined. We're looking here at this word this, okay, and it's asking us, the word this refers to doctors, doctors, A, pointing out the risks of harm from a particular drug, providing information. Okay, so verbs are very distinct here. Providing information about the effects of drug taking, attempting to regulate an individual's drug consumption, or supporting an individual's efforts to reduce their drug intake. Okay, pause the video. You've already read the text. Look around that word. So the sentence before and after usually gives some sort of indication. And most specifically, you should actually be able to replace the word this with whatever answer you choose. And if you can't, if it doesn't logically make sense, then there's an issue in your choice. So pause the video. When you're ready, I'll go through this. All right, assuming you've paused it and made your choice, here's what we're looking for. So again, control over what exactly. And what's tricky here is there's two that seem close. So the first two, A and B, are a little bit easier to differentiate. And I would say the tough part here is deciding between C and D. I'll tell you now one of those is correct, but let's quickly review why A and B are not correct. So A, pointing out the risk of harm from a particular drug. In this case, if we're thinking here, they're exerting some control over something. What is it that they are controlling itself? So here they're pointing out the risks. They're controlling over pointing out the risks. That doesn't logically make sense if you see what I mean there. Same, very similar with providing information. So if we substitute to exert some control over providing information, both of these are not so much a what they're controlling. This is a, how or why. They're doing it through pointing out the risks or through providing information. But we're actually looking at in this case, like what is it that they are controlling and in what way, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's look at C there, attempting to regulate an individual's drug consumption. So a couple of clues here for sure. We want to look for synonyms that can help, and certainly, control and whatnot. We also want to look for cause and results that can sometimes help as well. So does this sentence make sense if I read this to you? It is the physician's responsibility to exert some control over this being their attempt to regulate, so specifically regulation of an individual's drug consumption. That should logically make sense based on what I'm hearing. So it's actually like the what part that they're regulating is the drug consumption. And then if we see here again, the language attempting to regulate, that's it is reflected in the language before it. So the actual part here that fits into this part is the individual's drug consumption. And that's tricky because you're piecing those things together and seeing, is it reflecting it? Now, in contrast, supporting an individual's effort to reduce their drug intake. So again, back to what is actually being controlled. It is the drugs that are being taken in, right? Rather than you're not controlling so much their efforts or, as we see here, their knowledge of the harms and whatnot. And again, what is the result? Well, It limits medical harm if they do regulate the drug consumption. So to conclude that one, the answer is C. And what you're looking for is you're looking for in that answer option what you can actually physically replace with the word this and it logically making sense. The rest of it can distract you a little bit if you're not carefully reading, but these here is paraphrasing or synonyms to what comes before it, if that makes sense. All right, same thing. If there's any clarification needed, let me know in the comments below for this sort of question. Lexical reference ones, sometimes they're easy, sometimes they can be challenging. Great. Let's go to number 9 here. Okay, so this is paragraph 2, and it's nice. They tell us in the second paragraph, so we know what they're asking. The writer suggests that doctors involved in doping risk. So notice again, suggests, right away we should be thinking, okay, evidence may not be immediately apparent to us. So pause the video, read your options, read your text. When you're ready, unpause there. Great. Okay, let's go through this. I want to do another process of elimination for you to show you how helpful this can be. So here's what's challenging about this question. Aspects of most of the options can be found in the text. But again, with suggests, only one of them is what the author's actually pointing us to as a result. So let's start at the bottom here. Placing unrealistic performance demands on their clients. So look here again, we have that exact language, demands of performance. But look at it's being said. In fact, these are doctor-client relationships that can subordinate medical judgment and the client's health to the demands of performance. What is it saying? It's saying that demands of performance are a factor, and then the doctor is subordinating this judgment to that. But again, is the doctor themselves actually placing those demands on performance? Well, we don't know. Likely not. It's probably the industry itself or, whatever else you can think. But in this case, we can't just make that conclusion based on what we think is likely, right? We need to find some good evidence in the text for that. Okay, so that can rule out D quite nicely. How about this one? Becoming dependent on income from celebrity patients. Okay, so look at this next sentence. This mismatch is exasperated when doctors become infatuated by the celebrity of their quote unquote patients. So another thing to look out for, we have literally the exact words, celebrity patients, but notice this part, dependent on income. Is that the reason? Is it money that's driving them? Well, according to what's written, it's actually the, infatuation or the desire to be, to be close to them or near to them or admired by them. So this is common where you can rule out options based on quite literally one word that makes it incorrect as an option. Okay, how about this next one? B, believing the message that they know everything. Don't forget, the question is about the doctors involved in doping risk. So if we go here, just as doctors can succumb to the charismatic appeal of athletes, athletes can revere doctors as if they have all the answers. So when I first look at this, I think, okay, actually, as if they have all the answers. So there we see they know everything. But be careful. Who is it that is actually believing this message? It's the athletes, right? Athletes can revere the doctors. So if we don't read our question carefully, we'll miss that key piece of information. So the who and the what, they have to match. So based on that, I can tentatively conclude that the only viable option left is A. But that's not enough. We need to go find some evidence in here. Hopefully you notice some of these language paraphrasing here. Look at the word here, subordinate their medical judgment. Good. What else? They willingly abandon medical norms in favor of the ambitions. So, and was there anything else in there? I just want to check my notes. I think those were the two main phrases. But look at if somebody subordinates their judgment to something else. What in effect are they doing? They are compromising, right? They're putting something else above something else. Willingly abandon. So again, in favor of something else, I put this above my medical norms. So what that suggests, tells us, is we look at those and we say, we have evidence here, we have descriptions. Is that actually the word compromise? Is that actually fitting that? And it is quite clearly in both of those examples, putting one above, putting this whole notion of the celebrity patients first above their medical standards. So look how nicely those pieces fit together. Same thing, if you need clarification, let me know in the comments below. I also would be interested to hear, which approach do you find better for you? Do you like to start with your negative evidence, so working backwards, or do you prefer to go right into what are some phrases that point to my answer here? What are some synonyms? That's also an interesting thing to discuss as well. So those are our first 3 questions, but we have more to come. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. My next video will address our 3 questions left for this text. Now, you've made it to the end of the video and I have an exciting announcement for us, and that is for those that are preparing for your OET and you're watching these videos and you need some more practice, just examples and strategies talking through with someone. Well, good news is I have an upcoming workshop, and let me just make sure you can actually see this here. So I'll make myself a little bit smaller if I can. I don't think I can. That's all right. You're not missing anything. It just says availability at the bottom there. So I have an upcoming 2-hour OET reading masterclass, and it will happen on Monday, March the 10th. I'm based in Calgary in Canada, so that's 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. It is $25 Canadian for anyone who would like to join me. What we're going to do, we're going to cover strategies. So parts A, B, and C for reading. We're going to review the things in this video, but I'll also point out there's more to say as we see different questions. Hands-on practice. I have lots of sample tests in the description box below. There's information of how to find those if you are interested. But in my masterclass as well, lots of practice with challenging questions. It's also a chance for you to ask me questions. So often I find with individuals, they have difficulties that if we talk about it together in a live setting, it can provide so much clarity to some of those doubts. So for those interested, register now. It's coming up in a few weeks. There is limited availability as I want there to be interaction and participation. So all the information is found down below. There's a link to click that will take you straight to the registration page. And I just encourage you, whether your exam is week's time or it's in 3 months' time, join me if you're struggling with this reading section. And I would be more than happy to work with you and help you through more of these questions. In the meantime, all the best studying until our next video.